What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers? Welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolve video. What is up, soldiers? It has been quite some time since I last saw you. Now, I'm very excited to talk about another Shadowverse Evolve deck, and of course, I'm going to try my best to get through all of them before the next set of cards do come out, and we have lots of content to talk about, and especially with the Super Evolve coming out, we're going to be doing a breakdown of how that works. But before we get into it, please like, comment, and subscribe if you do enjoy any of the content, and if you have any ideas of what decks you might want to see next, please drop a comment below. Alright, but without further ado, let's talk about the deck we're going to be getting into today. So it's going to be called Festive Abysscraft or Handless Abyss, whatever has just been running around your locals or running around your area of play. But I'm probably going to be calling it a Handless Abyss just because that's the whole main game plan for our deck. We need to have 0 cards in our hand, and that's where we're going to get the most value when we play. Alright, but let's start looking at our legendaries here. So we have Itsurugi, Eager, Admirer. So it's a 2-cost 3/2. You can advance for 4 to banish this, and you may summon an Itsurugi Paradise's End from your Evolve deck. You can activate if there are at least 5 Festive cards or at least 10 Abysscraft cards in your cemetery. When it comes to play though, you put a Wolfling Struggle token into your EX area. Alright, so of course, in the early game, being able to put out a 3/2 for some aggressive play is very good, and then on top of that, we get this token, and this token is going to allow us to select an enemy follow in the field and then deal it 1 damage, and then we can discard a card, and then if we do, we bury the top card of our deck. And this is going to be very good, especially on turn 2, because we do want to discard as many cards from our hand as possible. Especially we do get the 1 draw per turn, which you do have to equate for that when you do want to have those 0 cards in hand. So make sure you do play the first card that you play out of your hand so you can have that 0 requirement. Or if you have the token in your EX area and you do have the 1 card and it's not very good, you can go ahead and, do some neck recharge there, which is very good, especially since we need to go into the advanced card, which is going to cost us the 5 Festive cards, or at least 10 Abysscraft cards, which is something that we're going to get very easily, especially playing Abysscraft. Alright, but let us look at this advanced card here. So it's a 4-cost 6/5. When it comes into play, you select up to 3 enemy followers on the field, deal 5 to 1 and 2 damage to the others, and during your turn, whenever an enemy follower is put from the field into the cemetery, you can deal 1 damage to its leader and give your leader +1 defense. Okay, personally for 6 play points, I'm not exactly sure how I feel about this card, but I think being able to deal 5 damage to something is pretty big, especially if we're going to be playing super aggressive. Dealing 5 damage to a ward and then swinging in for face, or just being able to deal 5 damage and then ping other 2 followers, and then with this static ability of during our turn, whenever those followers hit the cemetery, we can deal 1 damage to the leader while healing ourselves for 1, and that's not just once per turn, that is constant. Alright, and then moving on into the next section of legendary / gold cards that we're going to need for the deck is the Paracelise Demon of Greed. Alright, so looking at Paracelise, so she is a 3-cost 3/3. You can evolve from 1, and you can activate only if there are 0 cards in your hand, but when she comes into play, you put the top card of your deck into your EX area, then you discard a card. And then looking over at her Evo, so she does turn into a 4/4, but on evolve, you select enemy follow on the field, deal 5 damage to it, 2 to its leader, then give your leader +2 defense, and then you put the top card of your deck into your EX area. Alright, so let's talk about our legendary before we get into our spell card here. So the legendary, we're going to be putting the top card of our deck into our EX area and then discarding a card. Optimally, we're going to want to discard a card that we want to, which we're going to get into pretty soon. But putting the card into our EX area is going to be very good because we essentially neg1 to just +1 or just net neutral, essentially. So being able to put those cards into our EX area is going to feel kind of bad just because our opponent is going to know what we're going to have in our EX area. And our EX area is going to be pretty full because we're going to be replacing our hand with cards in our EX area. So our opponent is going to know what we are going to be doing. But the thing about this deck is it's not going to really matter too much just because we're going to be playing so aggressively, and with cards like Paracelise on the evolve, we're going to be doing 5 damage for 4 play points and then pinging the enemy leader while healing ourselves, so that's a lot for 4 play points. Alright, so let us look at our spell card here. So we have Eternal Contract, so it's a 1-cost spell card. You can activate for 1 play point to banish this from your cemetery. You can select up to 3 cards in your cemetery and or banish zone named Paracelise Demon of Greed and shuffle them into your deck. You may turn any face-up cards in your evolve deck named Paracelise Demon of Greed face down. And you can do the following 2 times. You can put the top card of your deck into your EX area and then banish a card from your hand. Alright, so this spell card is what's going to help us loop. So if we've already done all 3 Paracelises, or if we have milled all 3 Paracelises, or have done the combination of playing a card and then milling 2 more, or just having a weird combination of how Abysscraft works, this is the spell card that's going to be our get out of jail free card. So when we do play this for 1, we're going to put 2 cards into our EX area, which is pretty nice because we essentially drew 2 into our EX area, and then we banish a card from our hand, which with the cards we are going to be looking at that are going to be banished, we're going to be using those cards to get some good value. All right, so before we get into our cards that we do want to banish slash discard, let's talk about our early game cards and some cards that I do think are very helpful for the deck. All right, so Briared Vampire, this is going to be our turn 1 slash turn 2 play that's going to go ahead and get our engine started. At that point, our opponent's going to know what we're going to be doing. We're going to be putting the top card of our deck into our EX area and discarding. If we're able to get some good generation that very same turn where we discard a card and we're able to get some value off of that, that's going to be very good. Now, a card that isn't run in every build, but if you are balling on a budget, I think this is a good 2-cost card. So we have Silvernail Markswoman. This is a 2-cost 3/2. Select enemy fall on the field and deal it 2 damage and discard a card. Not bad for 2 play points, especially if you are going first to answer that early aggression against your opponent. All right, so this next card might be a bit of a more hot take, which honestly I do agree, but I do think this card wants to do what the deck wants to do, and especially if you're balling on a bit of a budget, being able to just rock one of this in your evolve deck just to kind of catch your opponent off guard, being able to deal 4 damage and then in combo potentially closing out the game the very next turn. But usually around turn 7 we want to already kind of be in the threshold of finishing off the game. But this is a nice stat card. I wish it had 5 defense because honestly it's going to be pretty easy to remove this card, but we already do get most of the effects off of the evolve by being able to deal 4 damage to the leader and then 4 to an enemy follower, and of course discarding a card can be an option. All right, but next, let's talk about the card that we want to discard from our hand that's going to be giving us some value. All right, so we have Honest Age, Lost Forsaken. So when this card is discarded or banished from your hand, you may put it into your EX area and then we can evolve her for 1. And then we have our spell card Undying Resolve, which is a 2-cost spell card. When this card is discarded or banished, we can select the Abysscraft follower in our field and give it Bane. And then of course, we can select the Festive follower in our cemetery that costs 2 or less and then summon it. And if it's Honest Age, Lost Forsaken, you can give it +1 attack and Storm. And then of course we have the Evolve Honest Age, which on Evolve lets us look at the top 4 cards of our deck, and then we put a Festive card from among them into our EX area and put the rest of the bottom of our deck in any order. Now personally for me, I really do like the Undying Resolve discard just because you can give any Abysscraft follower Bane, which is pretty big because it doesn't really matter what the stats are, that's just hard removal, so you don't really need to care about stat lines there. But the Honest Age Lost Forsaken is just going to be good for getting more Festive followers in our EX area, so we can look for cards like Itsurugi and Paracelise. Alright, so before we talk about the big removal, let's talk about cards that are going to get the most when we have nothing. Alright, so our bronze card, Bat Usher, which is most likely going to be in our EX area when we do proc this. So it's a 1-cost 2/2. We have 2 cards in our hand, this gets +1 attack, and then if we have 0, this card has Storm. So being a 1-cost 3/2 with Storm by playing for 1 is actually pretty good. Alright, then next up we have Full Moon Leaf. So it's a 1-cost spell. You can select an Abysscraft follower in our field to give it +1 attack, and if there are 0 cards in your hand, we can give it Storm. Alright, so the big thing here for Full Moon Leap, in my opinion, is when you do go for Itsurugi Paradise End, you're actually able to give it Storm, which is a big follower, and especially having a total of that many play points is going to be a big turn initially. And if those cards hit the cemetery when we do the Paradise's End, we're actually able to ping for 1 while also healing ourselves, so being able to do that full thing in 1 turn is going to be very huge. Alright, and then lastly we have Room Service Demon. So she's a 4-cost 4/4. We can select enemy fall on the field and then deal it 3 damage, and if there are 2 cards or less in our hand, we can recover 2 play points. Then if there are 0, we can deal 2 damage to its leader. So we'll say fair play points, fair stat lines, fair ability. Being able to spend 4, and if we have 2 cards in our hand, which is something that can really just happen sometimes in our deck just because we do draw, and then there are awkward numbers, especially if we're running 4-cost and we're on turn 5. Being able to recover 2 play points is very nice since we can use cards like Bat Usher if they're in our hand, or Full Moon Leap, because if we hit that 1 to 0, then we're able to go ahead and proc the Storm, which is very good. And then if we have the 0, we're able to deal 2 damage to the leader, which is just good damage for just playing a card. Alright, and then we have the Humpty Dumpty package, which is actually pretty good in this deck, especially since it says you have to have 0 cards in your hand, and this evolve says you have to discard your hand. So it's almost like this was a match made in heaven, honestly. But being able to clear the board is the really big thing that we want for Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty will be in our EX area sometimes, which can just happen. Holding the gun there is not bad. Just being able to threaten, hey, I have the gun. Don't be afraid that I won't use it. Being able to deal 5 damage to the entire board is just big. And for those decks that go pretty wide, it'll definitely destabilize them if they have 2 or 3 plus followers on the field that they didn't get to attack with, and you manage to board wipe them all. All right, so moving on into my favorite section of the deck breakdown is the deck list here. So this is the official Shadowverse Evolve list that they have on the website. Do check it out if you want to. I personally don't agree with some of the ratios here, but I think this is just a good starting point. And then anyone you might run into at locals might say, hey, you know, check this out or whatnot. But I do think this is a very good starting point. Now, what I disagree with personally is the amount of Humpty Dumptys they do have in the deck. I really want to have it on me at all times. Like, having the piece on you just gives you that security. Like, at any time you could just be like, hey, I'm doing 5 to the board. There's not that many cards that are going to have 6 defense when we are in the Humpty Dumpty range. And of course we can take a couple bits of pieces of damage early on in the game because we are kind of like really setting up, but we're also aggressive too. So being able to do Humpty Dumpty and then Paracelise afterwards, especially if we have Paracelise in our EX area, it's going to be huge. All right, so moving on into my personal build for the deck. So I want to talk about a couple ratios of cards that they didn't include in the regular deck, which honestly, I feel like they just should have put this in there originally. But like I said, the main thing I wanted to talk about was having a 3 of Humpty Dumpty. Like, you really want to be Rhesus and can't be caught without the piece. Like, you need to have that security. If you have that piece on you, you know, you don't really need to fret too much. Now, mind you, after you're not going to have 0 cards in your hand, you got to make sure you have some good recovery there by having cards in your EX area. But if your opponent managed to play super aggressively and you weren't able to really answer with cards like Deads to Rights to stop the early game, or kind of like match by discarding the Undying Resolve to give something Bane to just have some good removal for 1/1, that's just something you're able to do. But if they're able to like overextend you in like a big way, I think Humpty Dumpty is just something that you need a 3 of. All right, so another card I did want to talk about was the Parkour Werewolf. So this is very good 6 damage, especially for 6 play points. Being able to heal yourself with 2 while also pinging the enemy leader for 2. Like, I just think 6 damage in one go is very big, and especially if we're only going to be having like X amount of cards, like 0, and this being the top card we put into our EX area, this is something we can set up very nicely. So being able to spend a total of 6 play points to go ahead and get into that storm damage is very big. Right, and lastly, I did want to talk about Torchbearing Guide. So this card is very good to go ahead and get those festive cards into your EX area. And of course, if you have the maximum of 3 festive cards, you get that extra bonus. But that's something that they did miss in the last one. And now, honestly, there aren't that many festive cards in the deck. Don't get me wrong. There really aren't that many. But the amount that we do have is enough for us to potentially hit this in the later game, especially if we're going to be putting cards into our EX area later on. But yeah, soldiers, the Handless Abyss deck that I did make is now in the deck description, and it is now public as of making this video. I will be doing a new thing that you can actually talk to me and, you know, converse about me about these decks or any questions that you might have in the Discord. I will be posting it in the Abysscraft tab. So now further on, whenever I do breakdowns, I will just be copy and pasting the deck list that I have. And any of you subscribers or any of you soldiers out there that want to talk about my bad ratios or bad things that I might have in my deck, we can have a conversation about it. We can talk about it and I can give you my reasoning. And then, you know, we can just have a little back and forth banter about, you know, what cards are better, because come on, who wants to run bad cards in these good decks? But alright, soldiers, I appreciate you watching the video. It means a lot to me that you are still around, caring about Shadowverse Evolve. I really do love this community, love the game a lot still. Just have been on the out and out, just not been able to pick up cards too often. Have been able to play a little bit here and there, but I'm looking into, you know, playing a little bit more. Looking interested in playing at Philly, just in case if any of you have seen me at Philly a couple of times. Been there 2 years in a row, so, you know, it'd be a shame if I didn't go the 3rd year. But, you know, we're gonna look into that. Now, any other updates I can't really think about. Life has just been crazy. You know, happy Valentine's Day to anyone who was celebrating the love in the duo tournaments and stuff like that, which I did ask about, which I'm assuming just didn't go very well since you needed like 2 people. And so for some people, it was kind of weird. But, you know, I think that was just good showcasing and stuff like that. And I knew we had the Lunar New Year tournaments too, which, like I said, I don't have an LGS, so I really do hope that the game becomes more widespread so I have something a little bit closer to me so I'm able to, you know, fund those events and stuff like that. But to anyone who's enjoying all those events and stuff happening, I hope you're having a wonderful time and a wonderful day as well. But alright, soldiers, make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do. Just to get you away. What I got to do.